joiner here. What I have here I brought out of storage. It's a 6-inch joiner. It's a Menards from the 80s. Got a lot of surface rust. Motor still works. The switch, however, won't shut off. It's on the constant run mode. I'll turn it on here. So, still functioning good. Blades definitely need to be sharpened or replaced. So I thought I'd do is maybe show a little bit of the disassembly, because we're going to tear this completely apart and we're going to clean everything up and try and turn it back into a good quality working machine. Maybe even touch up some of the paint. We'll see as we go. But if you want to see it taken apart, see it cleaned up, see it put back to operational service, please stay tuned, keep watching the video, and I'll be back at you shortly. Thanks. Okay, I've taken the guide board off, guide plane off the side, the adjustable one, and a lot of surface rust. What I'm doing is just using my oscillating palm sander, and I think I have like a 220 grit in there right now. I don't want to put anything aggressive on there. You can see I've gotten some of it cleaned up over here. Of course, this is still all rust. You can see a little bit of pitting, but I think if we just take our time and go over it, you can see the edges aren't exactly flat completely. So maybe we'll kind of work that plane in there as we take our time and just work on this a little bit. Okay, slowly getting there. There's still a little bit of pitting in there. I think we'll be able to get a fair amount of it out, but we'll keep working at it. There's probably always going to be a little bit left in there unless I was to shave this whole thing off, which I don't think I really want to. The main thing is to get all the rust off as much as possible. And then we might go in with some wet and dry here. I'll have to pick some up. I don't have any wet and dry sandpaper here, probably like a 320 or something like that. And do a final wet sand on it, and then probably get some paste wax or something to put on it. Okay, till next step. Thanks. Okay, another day. Worked on the inboard side first, and I started with a 60 grit just to get most of the heavy rust off. Then I went down to a 120. Now I'm at a 220 grit, and I need to go pick up some wet and dry, so I think I'm going to get some 320, 400, someplace in that range. Here's the outboard side. Very, very, very rusty. This thing's been in storage for probably about 30 years. So, and I'm using an oscillating palm sander, so I don't get too many streaks and deep cuts in various different directions. Easier to try and de-rust the top of the surfaces first before I disassemble this the rest of the way. Make it a little bit more awkward to try and get at. So, not perfect. Let's see if I can zoom in on some of the spots here. I got a little spot there that seems to be lower than the rest of it, and I have some fairly deep pits there, which I'm not going to be able to get out unless I resurface the entire thing completely, which means sending it to a machine shop. And I also have on the front edge a bunch of chips taken out, so I'm not sure what happened there, and a little bit more pitting at that spot, but I think we can get it cleaned up enough that it'll be usable for woodworking purposes. And of course we're going to disassemble and get at the bearings and get everything cleaned up. So I'm going to continue on to the outboard side, and once I pick up some finer sandpaper, we'll finish this up a little bit and get something on it to cover it so it doesn't rust as easy. Be back at you. Now, one of the things I did try try and speed things up a little bit without getting too aggressive is get one of these very abrasive Scotch-Rite pads. This is one of the very coarse ones. So you have to be careful with it. You can't just use it by hand, otherwise you're going to get some digging in and so forth. So what I did was actually put it right underneath my palm sander, and then I can turn it on. And let it take off most of the heavy rust. This is what it looks like so far just by using that. Now I'm going to switch over to some 60 grit to get a little bit more out. Still got some pitting areas in there. They're probably going to end up being there, but then I'll go down to some finer sandpaper. And we'll touch base then. Thanks. Okay, just did some wet and dry on this side over here. This side is down to 220. And then this side, I'm finishing up with some 800 wet and dry. You can see it's a lot smoother. We still have areas of pitting which we're never really going to get out unless this whole thing was shaved, and I'm not going to worry about that. How I'm doing this portion of it, I just put a little bit of WD-40 and 800, actually it's 600 grit, sorry, 600 grit wet and dry. And when you first start on it, it wants to drag a little bit, but you know you're getting close to the time when you're really not going to be doing much more removing or leveling, and all we're really trying to do is get the rust off and keep this as level as possible. Didn't really want to take too much material off, other than what we had to refinish the surface enough that it would be able to be adequately sealed with either wipe-on poly, which I'm probably not going to use initially, but I'm going to use some Johnson paste wax to start with, and I'll just have to remember to wax it every now and then. And then just wipe this off, and then what I'll do is I'll clean it again with some mineral spirits or lacquer thinner, and until I get this ready to go back together, I'm not going to spend too much more on this other than getting this pretty well prepped, and I'll just temporarily put some WD-40 on it until it's ready to go back together, and then we'll touch it up again after it's reassembled. So next step will be kind of finishing this off and then doing some more disassembly. Alright, second side definitely has a lot more pitting, and I don't know if I can get the light to shine on it as good as it should be to pick that up, but got them both pretty much where I think I'm satisfied with it. We'll do a little touch up again once we get it all back together. But after I got done sanding, then I wiped it down with some mineral spirits to get a lot of the gook cleaned up off of it, and then I took a rag and wiped it down real quick with some acetone to definitely get the surface completely clean. That flashes off real quick, so. And then I just took a paper towel with a little bit of WD-40 just to protect it for right now until we're done. Okay, on to the next. Alright, got all the in-feed and out-feed tables off. And the Gibbs old grease, hardly anything on there, pretty rough. Should be able to clean them up though. I don't see any major scarring on them. And the adjustment handles come off. So I'm going to get this all cleaned up. And get the base all cleaned up. And then a few other things cleaned up. I'm going to repaint this too. And then we'll work on getting the reassembly done. Okay, got it all cleaned up. Went through and just kind of sanded the way areas a little bit just to kind of smooth them out. You can see the finish is pretty rough. I must have used a really out of round cutting tool. Probably a face mill. Of course, the dovetail slot doesn't look all that great either. So, must have had a lot of axial run out in the tool. But anyways, it's not going to move a whole lot very often once we're done, but I'm going to go ahead and put some paint on this and move on to the next thing. Okay, this is the front of the center base. I got all the ways cleaned up. Put just a dab of WD-40 on them to keep them protected for now. I taped that over and I repainted the whole thing. So far, looking pretty good. And I'm going to finish up the in-feed and the out-feed tables and go from there. Okay. This is the in-feed table. They're all cleaned up and painted. And got the ways cleaned off and a little bit of WD-40 on them so that they don't rust again. And on this side is the top side, of course. This is where the guard flip mounts. I'm just doing another little light touch-up. Just a little bit of WD-40. This is 800 grit, no, 600 grit, wet and dry. And I'm just kind of polishing it up just a little bit one last time. And smooths it out pretty decent. And of course I have some Johnson paste wax. After we get everything assembled, I'm going to give it a good rub down. And it seems to be cleaning up pretty decent. Go ahead and finish up the out-feed table. It's a little rougher than the in-feed table. This one turned out pretty good. I'll give you a shot of that here in just a minute, as soon as I clean it up. Okay, here they are side by side, all ready to go. The one on the left is the in-feed, the one on the right is the out-feed. As you can see, the out-feed's got a little bit more pitting in it, well, a lot more pitting in it, but it's pretty smooth now. Shouldn't have any issues with actually using it. So we're finished with those, finished with the centerpiece, and now we're moving on to the fence and its attachments. Then we'll get on to cleaning up the motor, and then the blade bearing assembly, that needs all cleaned up, and got to get the knives resharpened, and then we'll be basically ready to put this back together. So stay tuned.